Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Convicts and Cops. I welcome everybody interested in the gang genre, football fans, baseball fans, even hockey and basketball fans. I know you're all feeling it right now. This is the time of year when all the sports merge in the month of October. And my Dodgers are in it again, in it to win it, I hope. And I am predicting the Dodgers make it to the World Series. No disrespect to Milwaukee. And we take it. The winner of the National League is going to take it. So without further ado, I want to touch on Popeye Roman from the Harpies. Popeye is, to me, an example of a lot of the politicking and inner fighting that started taking place up to the current time in the Mexican Mafia. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that didn't exist in my time, but not at the rate that it's happening today. It's very profound, very disheartening, I would think, for people that are involved in that world, but it's part of the life. And I think the street gang members, the Sureños, and even the Eme guys and other prison gangs, I think they experience the same thing. With the Eme, it's really something that's historical. And I want to touch on the historical aspect of this because I do consider myself a history buff. And even though this episode is about Popeye Roman and the fall of the Roman Empire, as they called it, it's also about the politicking and the backstabbing that takes place so people can understand how that's taken place. I want to start off with there were many incidents back in the past, but I want to start off with Alfie Sosa and Cuate Jimenez. Alfie and Cuate were in the federal prison system together in the mid 70s. And Alfie had a way of rubbing carnales the wrong way. He got his ass whipped several times by fellow carnales. Cuate whipped his butt in McNeil Island, I believe it was, in the federal penitentiary. It was a personal thing, and they decided they wouldn't tell the brothers, they'd handle it by themselves. That was the first time Alfie got his ass whipped. And I'll get back to that. I'll get back to Alfie. Anyway, in this instance, the first major politicker within the organization was a guy that I was very close to. He was near and dear to me, even though many people think because I talk about how he politicked all the time that I had something against him. No. Robert Salas is Robot from Hazard, from Big Hazard. And I loved Ro as a member. And when he got on the streets, he got involved in the drug part of it, like I did. In fact, he inherited the drug operations, the overseeing the drug distribution for the fellas when I got arrested in 75 for double homicide with Sailor Boy. So while he's out on the streets, he started getting yes men around him. He started politicking against other carnales to solidify his position, and they pretty much would agree with whatever he wanted done. Cuate Jimenez is one of the original members from Eloyo Mara. He committed the first homicide inside the prison system on behalf of the Mexican Mafia. So he bumped heads with Robot on the streets over philosophical ways to proceed. Robot was always wanting to run the show. He thought he was in Folsom. In Folsom, they kind of let him have his way because they figured, he means well, let him do his thing. And these are all the OGs that kind of let him go in there. And on the outside, a lot of the guys of similar age or younger, they weren't buying into Robot attempting to run things. So Cuate was a voice of dissension. Cuate was an OG. And so they, Robot politicked and spun a story around Cuate rebelling, disrespecting the clica, and Alfie Sosa volunteered to kill him. And part of the reason that Alfie got joy out of doing this, because he told me so in Tijuana, is because of the ass whipping that he had got at McNeil Island. So, that was in January of 1977. It's when Cuate got killed. He got shot to death by Alfie. And that was like one that stands out in my mind. And there were many homicides taking place on the outside, a lot of them internal during this period of time. And the next one that comes to mind took place a month later. And again, it involved Robot. They were at a baptism in San Francisco for uh, Steve Amador, Calote. I'm getting brain farts with some of these old guys in my old age. Calote was baptizing his daughter, and the carnales were there. A lot of guys were there. Sailor, Robot, different. Tati was there. Black from Clover, and all of them got together for that event. And just like any criminal organization, baptisms, weddings, and funerals are major events where the fellows would get together with their wives, and then they would separate from the main body to conduct business, to talk about who needed to be killed, and talk about the drugs and whatever criminal enterprise they were conducting at that time. So at this particular baptism, they got together and Robot brought up the topic of killing Gilbert Roybal. And the reason he gave is because he said that Gilbert Roybal had burned me. He didn't report with money to me for some drugs. And of course, Sailor knew the whole story and told the group that I had already forgiven that debt and everything was fine. So he came up with another reason to kill him. And so that reason stuck. And the fellas, Alfie and Choco, went to his residence, and Tati drove the getaway car, and they ended up killing Gilbert. And that was kind of sad because, in that world, even though we're ruthless, we were ruthless with other people, not with ourselves. Unless you did something really wrong, you broke a rule and you had a killing coming, all this politicking stuff was kind of new. It didn't really happen that much. Another reason is because you had the haves and the have-nots. The guys that were movers and shakers that wanted to sell drugs and make money were on one tier, and then the have-nots were the dead weight. The brothers that all they wanted to do was stick the needle in their arms. To be clear, 99% of Mexican Mafia members were tecatos and probably still are tecatos. Okay. But the ones that are productive and making money, they can afford to get high on their own supply. So they do both. They sell drugs and they also profit from the drugs. The dead weight, back in my day, they couldn't do much because nobody was going to carry the guys that didn't want to produce. Today, you can be dead weight. If you're behind bars, you've got something going on the outside because the way things have changed with regard to the revenue and the taxation of gangs and everything. So even the dead weight, I use Chavo Perez as an example of dead weight in my time, and he was making money at least $30,000-$40,000 a month from his prison cell. So for a guy that's dead weight to make that kind of money from a prison cell, and he's using like a dog inside the prison system. In fact, he died of a heart attack from his heart couldn't keep up anymore. He loved heroin. So for a guy like Chavo, who I loved like a brother back then, of course, that tells you something. These guys, even though they're behind bars, are making money. So Gilbert Roybal was killed needlessly. The next two homicides took place in 1977, also a direct result of internal politicking. And the reason I connect them, even though one's a female and not a carnal, is because Pelon from Primera Flats, Albert Gonzalez, there was a big issue about him and Bruno Chavez from the Avenues, whether or not they were considered validated prison gang members from the Clica. Purportedly, somebody recruited them in Soledad Central without consulting with the rest of the brothers. So they became controversial. Their membership became controversial. Uh, Ultimately, Bruno was killed by Widow Shyrock on the streets with somebody else. They stabbed him to death. And Pelon was on that shaky status at the time when we hooked up with Joe's main Mexican drug trafficking connection, which was Jesse Araujo. They called him Chewy, who was the head of the Chewy. He was the head of the Araujo family. This is before they called them cartels. So Chewy had a request. One of his vendors, one of his dealers in East LA from Primera Flats, was killed. He was ripped off, and the guy that set it up was Pelon from Flats, and the female that got the door open was Pelon's sister Maruca. So then there was a third person involved. So he had three targets that he requested to be executed, and he offered to pay us for this to take place. And me thinking, okay, yeah, we can get the first guy in the feds. Pelon and Maruca can be got on the streets. So I'm thinking on the money part of it. And Joe, even though we were drinking, we were probably a little tipsy, maybe drunk, drinking tequila. And Joe tells Chewy, "Don't worry about payment. We'll do it as a favor," which is a a stroke of genius, because this makes them beholden to us even more, which we were already starting to get the beginning of the drugs that we were going to get, the heroin and the cocaine, exclusively from Chewy. So that was Joe's, said, "Don't worry, we'll take care of it." So the guy in the feds, the target in the feds, he locked up before he could get hit, so that there was no way to get to him. But Pelon from Flats, they got him. The fellas, the word was put out on the streets, and the fellas located him in on Vicky Drive in the city of Whittier. And when his family was out and he was home alone, they took him out. He was found dead in the residence. Uh, his sister was warned to get out of Dodge, to move away from the danger area. She moved to Huntington Park, which wasn't very far. And so the fellows found out her whereabouts, and Perico from West Side Flats, Armando Ochoa, who's now deceased, he picked up the hit assignment. And in those days, you got to remember, we didn't use Sureños to do hits. We did all the hits. We did them ourselves. So in that case, there was Perico, who posed as a mechanic, went to her residence, knocked on the door. When she answered the door, he blew her away. So two of those targets were taken care of, all connected to the Pelon thing, to the internal, the way they manipulated certain events. The third one that I want to touch on took place in 1993, and it's a more modern event. It took place in the so-called Pepsi generation. Uh, Anything that happened from the 90s on to the current time, and especially in the 90s, I think of that generation, I think of the Pepsi generation. It's a new way of proceeding. This is when they started embracing Sureños. And there's a lot that we're going to talk about in the future with regard to that, and also in this Popeye episode that we're doing. In this case, it was Topo and Smilon conspiring to take out Manuel Luna. Now, I know that Manuel Luna is mentioned as the third homicide in connection with American Me. You had Ana Lizárraga, of course, the lady actress who played the grandmother of the guy they found dead of an overdose in the movie, if you recall. She was the first target. There's a story behind that. And then there was Charlie Brown, Mexican Mafia member, who was also killed. Story behind him that I won't get into at this time. And then there was Rocky, Manuel Luna. And in his case, I cannot even tell you that the fellas even found out that he was a technical advisor. I happen to know, almost knew, we talked about it, Edward James Olmos and I, we did discuss it, but I don't know, and I cannot tell you that that's the reason. There was a lot of politicking already going on, and Topo gave the green light to Smilon from Hazard, and that solidified Smilon's position as the so-called godfather of Ramona Gardens. So that's all that language is in the RICO that Smilon was involved in. So another example of backstabbing and politicking, and now we're talking into modern time frame. So in the 90s, between the first RICO in I think 94, 95, and the second RICO, which took place about 99, there was a lot of infighting. There was a lot of street fighting by proxy, utilizing gang members, going after each other. Of course, there was plausible deniability amongst carnales, because one of our rules is you don't lift a hand against a fellow brother. So what do? If you're not lifting a hand against a fellow brother, you're fighting by proxy, using sureños to fight each other. And even that is frowned upon, because you're encroaching on another brother's turf. So now that became something punishable by death. So you had to deny that your guys did that to the other guys. So a lot of BS going on in that time frame. I think one of the incidents is when Stranger from Rockwood, Chuy from Barrio Nuevo, these were both Mexican Mafia members at the time, attempts to kill Stranger. They fire, and they almost kill him, and he's with his wife and baby, and that was it. Stranger then turns, and now the reverse is in the planning stages, is to take out Mariano, to take out Chuy. And it came very close. There were events that almost had him killed, but it didn't happen. Other people were killed in the process. That's another story. So that led up to the killing of Victorio in Goshen. Goshen is a little town, suburb, if you will, or a little town next to Visalia, which is in the Central Valley. So he was killed near a Greyhound station, or at a Greyhound station. And the guy that was convicted of it was Chacho Woody. Many of you know him as Woody from Cantaranas, Mexican Mafia member. And he ended up getting convicted and dropped out. It was in not good status. All of this, again, internal politicking that's taking place. Now, why is it more proliferated? Why has it accelerated at this time frame? There's more money. A lot of drugs, a lot more drugs than in my time frame. Like I said, in my time frame, we have the haves and the have-nots. Now we're in the 90s, and you got a lot of money. There's territories. They're embracing sureños. They're utilizing sureños to do hits now, where in our time frame, we didn't do that. So now they're getting more progressive, more forward-thinking, and Victorio was one of the casualties of internal politicking. Again, this theme that I'm talking about here, internal politicking, will dovetail into this episode of Popeye Roman. The next one that came to my mind was Frankie Buelna. Originally, he was Chivo from Merced. He was a norteño. He was from Northern California. But back in the day, norteños and sureños, we didn't even call each other norteños and sureños. But North and South Mexicans behind bars were all the same. And Chivo, he was close with the fellas. I think it was Robot who raised his hand for Chivo in San Quentin, right around 1968, right around the time before the shoe war took place. Chivo had a facelift, if you will. He went from Chivo from Merced to Chivo from Primera Flats. So I think what happened is the dudes from Flats embraced him, the ones that were in the MA, like Big Mike Mulhern and Kiki Mays, many of the guys from Primera, and they walked them into their neighborhood. Him and Big Mike Mulhern were crime partners. They did some armed robberies together on the streets. Well, later in life, we fast forward in time, and he becomes Frankie B. You know, when somebody brought that up, I said, who in the heck are they talking about? Then I come to discover, when I saw his picture, he had longer hair, of course, that it was Frankie B, Frankie Buelna. And so he gets killed. He gets involved in some internal strife with the fellas. And one thing that you learn, and anybody should learn, is that I don't care what your reputation is. I don't care how much juice you have. Nobody, no one man in the Mexican Mafia is bigger than the organization. And that's what happened here with Frankie. He got too big for his britches. He started encroaching in other territory. And in 2007, in November, him and another gentleman that was in a bar, in Characters Bar in Pomona, were shot to death. And another example of internal politicking. And in this case, it wasn't just politicking, it was a carnal that went south. In other words, he did something that warranted a hit. The next guy was a Sureño. I'm not sure if he became a brother or not, but he was known as Little Man, Frank Mendoza, Little Man. And he was in the federal prison system. And I believe he did become a made member, but there is a major difference on the streets as to who runs the streets of LA between the state and the feds. I think anybody today, if you're sitting in front of your TV or your cell phone, you're probably nodding when I say the state, the MA guys in the state run the streets of LA and Southern California. And I would venture to say at least 95 to 98% of the streets are run by the state, the dudes in the state. So they had a few guys from the feds that would come out, and they thought that they could just come out and do certain things. Some of it turned into what was called encroachment, and it doesn't take very much to get the politicers at work. So he was shot to death in Hawaiian Gardens in November of 2016. The next one that took place, 2016, was another Fed. And he was, I believe, the stepson of Sapo from Pacoima, a longtime Mexican Mafia member who was in the Feds. And this guy's name was Dominic Gonzalez, also known as Solo. So he came out, participated in some taxing, some encroachment in areas that he wasn't supposed to be in. And after being warned and he persisted, they found him shot to death in the city of Industry. Once again, politicking and doing things that go against the grain. You got to get familiar with what you're doing. The next one that took place in California that stands out for me, I'm sure there's others, was Emiliano Lopez. They knew him as Tonito from Wilmas. And this one, he was stabbed to death, brutally stabbed to death in Calipatria in 2016. And this incident marked an advancement or something that when this happens, you got to give it a lot of thought as to what you're doing. This was Sureños that were utilized to take out a made guy. Of course, that created a lot of grief. Some of those guys were hit after doing what they were supposed to do. And I think I've touched on this before. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't as a Sureño following orders. And this was a case where it was something like this. So Tonito from Wilmas was another one. So as I took you on a cruise down the historical lane, touching on different time frames, different incidents. Of course, there's much more to flesh out on all the incidents that I just laid out to you. And there's incidents that I didn't even talk about. I haven't got into it because it's just taking a whole lot of time away, detracting from the official story that we're going to run into here, the episode of Popeye Roman. And there's a lot to cover here with Popeye, and I think now that you've gotten the preview or the flavor of what constitutes internal politicking, there'll be other related topics from this episode that I will touch on. But I think you get the gist, and welcome aboard, and enjoy this episode. When I say enjoy, I want you to be edified. I don't mean enjoy as if this is something pleasant. These are sad stories. To me, they represent things that happen, things that gang members might sensationalize, and they'll spin them any which way. And the fellas, I'm sure, will look at it like, hey, that guy had it coming, and he shouldn't have done that, and he shouldn't have done this. But you know what? A lot of these guys themselves are in the crosshairs. from one point to another. All it takes is one misstep, and you are in those same crosshairs. You can be the next Popeye Roman. So without further ado, we proceed to the episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Convicts and Cops. Today we are featuring Danny Roman and the breaking news that would come out of Corcoran State Prison on Wednesday, June 10th, 2020. The official story reported the slaying of Mexican Mafia member Popeye Roman, who was unceremoniously sent to Brazil, courtesy of his Carnales. Before we continue with this story, let's take a quick time out for a word from our sponsor from Psalms 55, verse 3. My enemies shout at me, making loud and wicked threats. They bring trouble on me and angrily hunt me down. The difference between David's biblical betrayal and Popeye's modern day tragedy is this. David knew he was a hunted man, whereas Popeye, somewhat comfortable in his lofty position with his Mexican Mafia carnales, never saw it coming. I suppose no matter how you slice and dice it, internal betrayal has a final and lethal conclusion. Danny Roman was born on January 17, 1956. Of Puerto Rican descent, Popeye was a member of the West Los Angeles Harpies 13 street gang and was committed to the California Department of Corrections in 1985 following a first-degree murder conviction. He was sentenced to an LWOP sentence, which is the prison abbreviation for life without the possibility of parole. Popeye was made by La M inside the prison system sometime in the 1980s. Until the day he passed on, Popeye Roman was the only Harpies gang representative in the Mexican Mafia. Such gang status is considered special in that world because it signifies that particular gang is found worthy of having a big homie and made guy from their ranks, a major honor in the Mexican street gang world. I'm sure many of you are probably blown away and wondering how incarcerated prison convicts, locked away in high-level state or federal prisons, can oversee an outside criminal enterprise from inside a prison cell. California is extremely gullible to enterprising organized offenders because their career-minded institutionalized criminals are masters at manipulating and exploiting the system. Corcoran and Pelican Bay prisons were constructed in back-to-back years for the primary purpose of separating the cancer from the general body of inmates. The concept was well conceived and the motives were understood by everyone who desired law and order. For the Mexican Mafia and other prison gangs to exert firm control over street and prison gangs, a clear line of communications is vital. When communications are disrupted, the crime machine gets bogged down, unless, that is, an innovative template is created. Popeye was one of the early Mexican Mafia visionaries who, from his high-security prison cell, participated in the elevated level of criminal sophistication and innovation. Unless you are housed in a fortress like the federal ADX facility in Florence, Colorado, where approximately 19 Mexican Mafia members are being held as I narrate this, you will most assuredly possess the ability to communicate with the outside world, most likely by having access to a cell phone. But that's another story. Mexican Mafia prison gang members are masters at reinventing themselves and exploiting the correctional system. The use of female facilitators and dirty attorneys is invaluable to conducting illicit business. Cloaked in the name of prisoner reform and human rights issues, we began in the 1960s and 70s using radical Bay Area attorneys for many purposes, including the introduction of drugs into prisons, exploiting confidential attorney-client legal correspondence, and face-to-face attorney visits to transmit Mexican Mafia coded messages, including hit orders, and many other criminal-related activities. Dirty attorneys, judges, law enforcement personnel, family members, and many other trusted people are employed by La M and historically have been shrewdly utilized for criminal enterprise. As I stated, today there is the luxury of cell phones inside prisons. This allows for real-time outreach and an instant avenue of communication from the inside to the outside and vice versa. Directly from behind bars, whether on death row or inside a high-security prison, the Mexican Mafia is capable of and routinely conducts criminal business at warp speed. They give new meaning to the old AT&T jingle that once boasted, "Reach out and touch someone." I can assure you these men can literally do more fatal damage with one phone call than a well-sharpened prison-made shank. In 1995, Popeye was one of the Mexican Mafia members who created the MESA system. The key carnales who implemented this system were Güero Sherm from Shelltown, Sleepy Huerta from Wilmas, and Caballo Gonzalez from Eastside 18th Street. The ingenious plan put an end to all Sureño infighting on California prison yards, established a vertical leadership structure, created and maximized the illicit revenue generated on prison yards, and boosted their communications. In the absence of an M member on a prison yard, the MESA system was similar to the criminal scheme installed on the outside, with street gang crews facilitating M business on the streets. While M members were warehoused in long-term security housing units like Pelican Bay, Sureños were the logical choice to execute the workings of a prison GP yard. The M visionaries, also referred to as the Pepsi generation, were the pioneers in the cultivation and integration of contemporary and creative business reproductions into the structure of the MS criminal enterprise. Before the MESA system, Sureños would write to a Mexican Mafia member requesting permission to run a prison yard as a llavero, or shot caller. It was not uncommon for numerous Sureños housed in the same prison to communicate with multiple M members and request authorization to run a yard on behalf of the Mexican Mafia. Mixed communications created conflicts among Sureños over control of a specific prison. A little historical background. In 1996, Mexican Mafia OG Robert Salas, aka Robot from Big Hazard, became a focal figure in the collection of M taxes in the west side of Los Angeles. He bumped heads with other M carnales involved in the Harpies area. Internal chaos ensued, and the shit would hit the proverbial fan. Robot placed a green light on the entire Harpies gang. The M made the gang pay $4,000 to have the green light lifted, and Harpies gang members Pony and Crook quickly and happily settled the debt. Simultaneous to this event, Harpies gang members were communicating with Popeye. This was the beginning of the Danny Roman so-called Roman Empire, a control that would span for well over 2 decades. On December 6, 2012, the LAPD, DEA, ATF, and U.S. Attorney's Office culminated a 2-year investigation into Popeye and his people. He was housed in Pelican Bay when the indictments were handed down, charging Popeye, his daughter Viana Roman, and a total of 31 people. The case was dubbed the Roman Empire and revealed the ever-increasing use of women in the Mexican Mafia and their expansion into legitimate investments. Viana controlled a massive street criminal enterprise for her father, and the U.S. Attorney's Office seized 4 homes and 1 business controlled or owned by Viana, who was 37 at the time of the takedown. Also seized was $95,000 in cash and 22 firearms, and Popeye had $45,000 in his prison inmate account, which was also seized by the feds. Talk about waving a red flag. When you have trusted facilitators in place, including your blood daughter, with the ability and wherewithal to purchase anything you could possibly need for your prison comfort, why would anyone even need that much money in their prison account? Viana Roman, also known on the streets as La Reina or the Queen of the Harpies, pleaded guilty and accepted a sentence of 25 years in federal prison. Someone with ultimate authority once said, "If anyone causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck." Although I will never question the love between a father and his daughter or son, nor can I judge Popeye's affection for his daughter Viana, protecting your kids from the evil of our world should be paramount and foremost. But I'm not going to lie and say I don't get it either. When you view life through the lens of an extreme gangster, a Mexican mobster in this case, this is how they bond with their loved ones. Love, loyalty, family, and all those important characteristics and components are applied differently. I was not exempt from applying those warped values to young women I should have been protecting. I once schooled a beautiful young lady known as Cyclona Perez, the younger sister of Chavo Perez. I even referred to her as baby girl. As my one-time Mexican Mafia brother, Chavo trusted me with the welfare of his little sister. I protected and guided her all right. I groomed her to be loyal to La M. I also used her to locate two targets. Further utilized Cyclona to use her female assets to get the door open. And to add to this picture, she even had the honor of firing the last bullet into the dying body of one of the two fatal victims we took out back in the day in her hometown of Bakersfield. Shame on me, I know. I pray that Viana Roman will shield her kids and grandkids from the darkness that comes with the life of crime. May she use Popeye's fatal consequences as an example of the life you don't want to live. The passing of Popeye placed the Harpies gang in a position many Sureño gangs experience, the loss of their significant big homie. Like a baseball team that loses its home run hitter, there is an EME-designated replacement ready to take over and receive the torch. Like others who vacate their thrones, Popeye's demise is in no way a reflection of the Harpies barrio. This is simply bigger business being handled at a higher level, be it natural death or internal purging. Let's consider for a second the stuff none of you are supposed to be talking about because it's such a big secret, but yet it isn't. The passing of Popeye was by Mexican Mafia design. This means the successor to the Harpies territory, we'll call it the Roman Empire with no pun intended, had already been chosen, with many indicators at that time pointing in the direction of a couple of Florencia 13 super bosses. Because of ongoing investigations, we won't touch on specifics. There are some examples over the past decade of big homies abdicating their thrones due to passing away in prison. Sana from Orange County, Chavo from Bakersfield, and Champ from Big Hazard, for example, produced similar scenarios in their territories, very likely producing some initial stress. Once the memo is sent down, the big homies have a very clear way of communicating who will be the installed heir apparent to oversee their gang areas. Rather than exercising loyalty, carnalismo, and criminal support for their fellow carnales, Mexican Mafia backstabbing, greed, and politics continues to be alive and well in the 21st century. Danny Popeye Roman was caught in his Corcoran State Prison cell and hit several times by his alleged assailant, who has been identified as Raul Alvarado, a 47-year-old recently recruited Mexican Mafia member, also known as Spy from Lenox. Ironically and rightfully, since he put in the work in the Pinta, Spy is rumored by the street grapevine to be one of the beneficiaries of the Roman Empire. Wouldn't surprise me a bit. Whereas his daughter, who is 49 years old, was recently released from federal custody. Popeye was 64 years old at the time he departed from this world. Since his arrest in 1984, he would never again see the light of day. These historical prison gang stories may be exciting to some folks, but I assure you, I relate them and view them with a heavy heart because they are sad testimonials. For many, breaking those chains of bondage are monumental because they are caught up in that madness. I ask that those of you who made it this far will join me in a prayer of intercession for Popeye's daughter, Viana, his grandchildren, and his family. May the good Lord touch, guide, and protect them, and reaffirm in their lives the ugliness of pursuing la vida loca con los vatos, the crazy life with the fellas. Also, and only a good Catholic could probably relate to this, may the Lord have mercy on Popeye's soul. Good night to you all, and God bless you.